Today, we are dealing with the case of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, one of the most bizarre cases of our time involving a religious cult. 5 deaths, 2 missing persons, and many questions. The story begins in San Bernardino, California. Lori Daybell, also known as Lori Vallow Daybell, was born on June 26, 1973, as Lori Noreen Cox. Her parents are Janice Lee Cox and Barry Lynn Cox. There was nothing special or unusual about Lori's childhood. In 1992, at the age of 19, she married Nelson Yanes, a young man she was with in high school. However, their happy marriage didn't last long, and they divorced after about a year. 2 years later, she remarried a man named William LaJoya in 1995. Things went well. They had a child, a boy named Colby Ryan. They were together for 3 years, but in 1998, Lori divorced William. After another 3 years, she married for the 3rd time, this time to a man named Joseph Anthony Ryan in 2001. Later, they had a child, a girl named Tylee Ryan. However, this marriage did not last long, and in 2004, Lori and Joseph divorced. It did not start well, as after Lori told her brother Alex that Ryan had abused and mistreated her, Alex attacked Joseph and threatened to kill him. This led to Alex being sentenced to 90 days in jail and 5 years probation. Lori was an attractive woman and had charm, but her sense of adventure and enthusiasm knew no bounds, and she was often disappointed. In 2005, Lori was single again, and although she had 2 children, she only cared for one, Tylee. In 2005, she met another man named Charles Vallow. Charles was a hardworking, tall, and handsome man. Moreover, he was always well-dressed. He came from a large family he never forgot. He was born on August 17, 1956, in Arizona. He met Lori when he was 49, but he looked younger and more energetic. Shortly thereafter, Lori married Charles on February 24, 2006. At that time, Charles already had 2 children from a previous marriage, Nicholas and Zachary. However, that didn't stop them from bringing their big family together under one roof. Charles's children, Lori, and her 2 children began living together. This family could be described as happy in every way. Charles was a relatively successful businessman and supported his family, while Lori was not a hard worker. Although she had worked as a hairdresser before marrying Charles, she quit her job after the wedding. Their family life was sometimes a bit strange. During summer vacations, Charles' children would spend time at their house, but Charles himself was not there. He was busy with work. Lori was usually with her family or friends, and Charles's children were often only with Lori's children, Tylee and Colby. In 2014, Charles and Lori decided to adopt Charles' great-nephew, Joshua Jackson Vallow. In 2015, when they were living on the island of Kauai, Lori became fascinated with a series of books titled Standing on Sacred Grounds. By many criteria, Lori could already be considered a Mormon at this point, as she had intensely explored the religion. At a certain point, the books became as essential to her as air, and she became almost obsessed with them. These books were written by a religious author named Chad Daybell, and from that moment on, she never forgot his name. In 2016, Lori's fascination with religious books grew even stronger. One day in the fall of 2018, she and her friend Melanie attended an event called Preparing a People. It was a religious event where Lori met Chad Daybell. According to her friend Melanie, Chad told Lori at the end of the weekend that he and she had been married in their past 7 lives. The two began texting after the event, and it didn't take long for passion to ignite. A few weeks later, when Charles was on a business trip, Lori invited Chad to her home. However, there was no hot night, as Lori had also invited her friend Melanie and a few other followers of Chad's ideas, and they all discussed the deep secrets of God. Chad kept his eye on Lori that evening and often put her in the spotlight. Chad Daybell was a strange man. He was born on August 11, 1968, and grew up in Provo, his hometown in Utah County. As a teenager, he met Tamara, and they got married 2 years later. He earned a degree in journalism from Brigham Young University. He was not particularly wealthy. His first job was digging graves in local cemeteries. This changed in 2004 when Chad founded his own company, a publishing house called Spring Creek Books. Chad had published over 25 of his books, half of which were the books Lori later became obsessed with. He moved his family to Rexburg. Incidentally, he and Tamara had 5 children and claimed that the Lord had commanded him to do so. Chad divided all people into people of light and people of darkness, categorizing them into levels and stages. He believed that the dark people came from this earth, but were followers of Satan, while those he considered people of light were followers of Jesus Christ. Chad told Lori that evening when she invited him to visit that he believed she was an eternal being who had lived 21 lives, 5 of which were on planet Earth, the same number of lives as him. Lori not only believed him but was also thrilled and fascinated by it. She was obsessed with her new life purpose and also with Chad. The two remained in constant contact after this meeting, and in October 2018, Chad contacted Lori via email to send her a map and lists of spirits of light and darkness, and to finally include her family and children in his system. So let's move to the year 2019. The Vallow family had returned from the island to Arizona 2 years earlier, and by this time, Charles and Lori's marriage had begun to slowly but surely fall apart. Lori was devoting more and more time to her religion, which had now become a kind of cult. She was increasingly withdrawing from her everyday life, becoming estranged, and her worldview became more eccentric. She was entirely consumed by the concept of light and dark people. Those she considered dark, she called zombies. She also believed she was an immortal spirit sent to lead especially protected chosen ones by God. Charles and Lori began arguing daily, and by this point, their marriage was on the brink of collapse. On January 31st, Charles was on a business trip. It was a Thursday. He had been away for a week and had not been in contact with his children for 2 days. When he arrived at the airport, he still hadn't heard from Lori and the children, and his car was missing from the parking lot where it had been parked. He took a taxi home. When he got there, he found that his keys didn't fit the lock. His belongings were in a trash can, and $35,000 was missing from his account. The man then called the police, and the officers came to his house. When asked what was going on, Charles replied, "How can I explain this? We have a Mormon here who thinks she's a rebellious being and believes she's God, and Jesus will come next year. She took all the money from my bank account. My car is gone from the airport. She took it, and basically, all the cars are gone." When the man entered the yard, he found that all the family cars and much more were missing. Charles also told the police that his wife had threatened him, but they didn't take his words seriously. Police officers even scolded him once or twice for wasting their time. Lori disappeared for 58 days during this time. Charles filed for divorce, although he feared for his life and that Lori would put them in danger, and the police didn't want to get involved. Indeed, she returned to Hawaii with her daughter Tylee and stayed there for almost 2 months. Now let's move on to the next part of the story. On July 11, 2019, in the early morning hours, a man called 911 and reported that he had killed a man. This man was Alex Cox, Lori's brother, and he had killed Lori's husband, Charles. At that time, Lori was driving Joshua to school while her brother Alex and her daughter Tylee were at home. Charles arrived at this time. According to Alex, Charles approached the house in a fit of rage, and while Tylee went to get a baseball bat, an argument broke out between Alex and Charles. Tylee returned with the bat, but Charles grabbed it from her and hit Alex on the head. Alex then took the gun and shot him several times in the chest. Charles died in the living room. The police found him a few minutes later. You would think the family would be in shock, but no. What was particularly suspicious was Lori's behavior. She was caught on camera at the crime scene, joking and even laughing about the situation. But even more suspicious were her actions a few hours later. Lori held a pool party at her house just a few meters away from where her ex-husband had died only hours before. Let's return to the crime scene. Alex tended to his wounds while the police questioned him. Although he claimed Charles had hit him on the back of the head with a bat, the injury was surprisingly light. But Charles was a semi-professional baseball player. If he had hit Alex on the head with a bat, he would have been dead. Police later released Alex without further questioning, stating it was self-defense. The next day, Charles's children, Nicholas and Zachary, learned of their father's death, only through text message. Lori chose not to call, and unlike the others, they were stunned by the news. Not surprisingly, Lori, along with Joshua and Tylee, soon left Arizona. They moved to Rexburg. After Charles died, the three began to settle into their new home in Idaho. However, Lori's story became even more horrific in the following months. In early September, she sent Joshua to a nearby school, but did not do the same for her daughter Tylee. It was Saturday, September 8, 2019, and Lori drove with her children and her brother Alex, Yellowstone National Park. If you look at the photos taken there, you can see that the family was happy, but this is the last time Tylee is seen. No one ever saw her again. She just disappeared. And surprisingly, Lori didn't even report it to the police. She simply stayed silent. And since Lori had just arrived with her children at her new home, no one noticed her daughter was missing. Joshua went to his new school for the first time the next day and seemed to settle in well. He even made some friends in the neighborhood. 2 weeks later, on September 17th, he was seen playing with a friend on the street in front of his new home in Rexburg. The doorbell camera caught the boy as he ran home, but that was the last time anyone saw him. On September 23rd, Lori called the school to withdraw her son from school. When asked by the principal, she replied that he had simply switched to homeschooling. And that was it. Joshua disappeared. Over the next 3 months, friends and other relatives of Tylee and Joshua became increasingly worried. To anyone who asked about the children, Lori said they were fine. She said they were either visiting friends or relatives. But despite all these statements, no one had seen them for weeks. During this time, 2 things happened. The first was that Lori started visiting a warehouse near Rexburg. On October 1st, 2019, she was caught by surveillance cameras bringing her belongings, such as children's bikes, scooters, and blankets there. The next day, the story continued. It is not entirely clear who she was with, but judging by the way he walked, it was probably Chad Daybell, who of course lived in Rexburg, Idaho. In total, Lori, her brother Alex, and Chad visited the warehouse 9 times in October, and once more in November. The second event, however, was far more eerie. On October 9th, Chad's wife Tamara was unloading groceries from her car in the driveway. At that moment, a masked man with a paintball gun approached her. When she turned to look at him, he opened fire. The woman started screaming and called Chad for help, and the attacker immediately ran away. Tamara then wrote on her Facebook page, "Something very strange happened, and I want you all to know and be careful. I drove up to the house and parked in the front driveway. As I was getting the bags out of the back of the car, suddenly, a man with a ski mask and a paintball gun was behind my car. He shot several times at me. I have no idea what his motive was. He didn't say anything, although I asked him several times what he intended." Tamara had been through a tough time. This attack clearly frightened her, but that wasn't the worst part because, 10 days later, Chad called 911 to report that Tamara had died. Apparently, she died in her sleep in their house. Investigators visited the apartment and deemed the death natural. However, when they offered to perform an autopsy, Chad hesitantly refused. The investigators found this reaction strange, but accepted his refusal without further questioning. Let's summarize this part of the story. We have Lori Vallow with her husband and 2 children. The husband is now dead, and the children are missing. We also have Chad Daybell and his wife, Tamara. Tamara is now also dead. It all seems a bit suspicious, doesn't it? All these murders, the disappearance of children, what's going on? What are Lori and Chad planning? Just 2 weeks after Tamara's death, Chad and Lori flew to Hawaii and got married there. From that moment on, Lori Vallow became Lori Daybell. Suspicion grew. The media began to slowly focus on the events in both families, while the police quietly watched from a distance. During their honeymoon, and even after their return to Rexburg, Chad and Lori began lying to the public. Chad said Lori never had children, and Lori said her daughter Tylee had died several years earlier. At the same time, on November 26th, the police decided to search Lori's house. The officers arrived and asked if they could see Joshua. Lori replied that he wasn't home. He had returned to Arizona with her friend Melanie. Just a few hours later, the Idaho police contacted the Arizona police and began working with them. When Melanie was asked about Joshua's whereabouts, she was surprised and said she hadn't seen the boy in weeks. She also told them that Lori and Chad had recently called and lied to her by staging a scene as if Joshua had been with them at the time. The police returned the next day with a search warrant for Lori's house, but Lori was no longer there, and neither was Chad. The newlyweds had flown to Hawaii. They remained silent whenever they came under the media spotlight. The police officially reported the two children missing. Authorities searched Chad's house with a warrant, seizing his computers, phones, and magazines, and demanded Lori bring Tylee and Joshua to the station within 5 days. Otherwise, she would be arrested. Lori's brother Alex also mysteriously died on December 12th. Amidst all these strange events, probable cause of death was a blood clot, or as some investigators would call it, natural death. Lori's time was up, but she didn't hand over Tylee or Joshua to the authorities. She remained silent, and the children's whereabouts remained unknown. On February 20th, 2020, Lori was finally arrested and jailed. The most important questions remained unanswered. Where are the children? Where could they be? And who was responsible for their disappearance? Family and friends felt the process was moving very slowly. Although all leads pointed to Chad and Lori, Chad was still at large as there was no solid evidence of his guilt. 4 long and arduous months passed. On June 9th, 7 a.m., the Rexburg police were at Chad's front door. They had another search warrant for the house. Just a few hours later, investigators discovered something gruesome: unidentified human remains in the middle of the property. A few days later, the medical examiner confirmed that the remains belonged to Tylee and Joshua. The question of the children's disappearance was finally answered. Tylee's family was inconsolable. During those long months, they had hoped nothing terrible had happened to the children, but the truth was shocking. Around 11 a.m. on the day the remains were discovered, Chad Daybell was arrested as he tried to flee. He didn't get far. He was apprehended about a mile from his house. He was taken to the Fremont County Jail, where he was charged with 2 felonies: concealing a crime and tampering with evidence. His trial is yet to take place. This story continues. Lori and Chad are still behind bars, awaiting their trial. Although the police said they should be charged with first-degree murder, they were initially held on much lesser charges. By the way, Lori's brother, Alex Cox, would also be in jail if he were still alive. Investigators found that on the day Tylee was last seen in the national park, Alex returned to Lori's house at 2:40 a.m. and stayed there until early morning before heading to Chad's house and staying there for 2 hours. The coordinates also showed that Alex was at Chad's house again after Joshua's disappearance. After the children disappeared, several witnesses reported that Lori began referring to the children as zombies, those she considered dark and followers of Satan. Lori and Chad seemed captivated by the ideas of their religious cult. They were in love, and when 2 monsters meet, unfortunately, nothing good can be expected. Investigations suggest Lori ordered her brother Alex to kill her husband Charles because she was fed up with him. Tylee witnessed Charles's death, so she was not meant to live. Joshua was not Lori's biological son, though she no longer cared for him. And Chad killed his wife Tamara when he met Lori and fell in love with her. It wouldn't even surprise me to hear that Lori and Chad also killed Alex, who was an accomplice in previous crimes. At the end of May 2021, the couple was charged with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, aggravated theft by deception, and first-degree murder of Tylee, Joshua, and Chad Daybell's ex-wife Tamara. However, the trial against the couple has been postponed several times. Lori and Chad's attorneys filed several motions with the judge of the 7th Judicial District during the hearing, including a request to postpone the trial to 2024. The attorneys also requested to drop the death penalty for Chad Daybell. The judge denied some of the motions, such as postponing the trial, stating he would later provide a written response to the remaining motions. Lori was deemed competent after undergoing psychiatric treatment, then declared incompetent, and finally found competent again. On March 21, 2023, the judge lifted the death penalty for Lori Vallow as new DNA evidence was found, discovered too close to the trial to be tested, and admitted in court. Finally, on May 12th, Lori Vallow Daybell was found guilty on all charges in a courtroom in Boise, Idaho, and sentenced to life imprisonment. In November 2023, Lori was extradited to Arizona to face murder charges there. In April 2024, she will face trial on suspicion of murdering the ex-wife of her fifth husband. Her fifth husband is also on trial for suspected triple murder. Thank you for watching, and take care.